So if you could find a seat. In case you came in the door over here, I just want to make sure you know there are sign-in sheets over here on the table, along with copies of the presentation, copies of the agenda, so make sure you grab that. Please do sign up. We will use that list for an interested parties list. So if you put your contact information on there, we'll add you to the interested parties list and you'll continue to get emails with information. It looks like we have plenty of chairs, so you can spread out and lay down if you wish and make yourself comfortable. We weren't sure what kind of turnout we were going to get. We were going to do this over in city council chambers, but decided we made it a huge turnout. We better be safe and have it over here. I recognize many faces that come to these meetings. In case you don't know me, I'm Don Zadiba. I'm the general manager of Indian Wells Valley Water District. And I've also been serving in the capacity of General Manager for the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority. Before we start, I just ask that we take a moment to honor the memory of a gentleman that was a long-time active advocate for the Eastern Sierra on environmental and water issues. Earl Wilson passed away over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. Earl, as I said, was very active in local environmental and water issues. Attended meetings going back to the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group, attended all these water meetings, and was actually appointed by the Eastern Kern Resource Conservation District as a representative to the Technical Advisory Committee for the Groundwater Authority. So if you would please honor him with a moment of silence, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Housekeeping issues. Residents of this valley know we've had some shaking going on lately, so if that should happen, be like our stewardess. We have these two exits back here, one over here. The restrooms, if you need to use it, if you haven't been here before, out the door, around the corner, and down the hall are the restrooms. Again, sign-in sheets back there, along with copies of the presentation and the agenda. We had 100 copies made. We didn't know how many people would be here, so it looks like maybe we have enough copies for everybody. The sign-in sheet is important because, again, we keep an interested parties list, and if you have your contact information on there, if we don't already have you on that list, we'll make sure to add you. On the agenda, just to structure this workshop, it's a public workshop, so there's no time limit to your comments, but I would ask that you be respectful of other people that may want to speak, and you're entitled to speak as long as you wish, but please be reasonable. So first item on the agenda, we're calling the meeting to order. We have a Pledge of Allegiance. If you would stand, please. And join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As I said, I'm Don Zadiba with the Water District and the Groundwater Authority. To my left, your right, we have Jeff Helsley and Steve Johnson from Stetson Engineers. Stetson Engineers is acting as the Water Resource Manager for the Groundwater Authority, and they will be doing the presentation of the plan. I did put together a little introductory PowerPoint. I don't know how many people follow this, but there's still people we find out that don't know much about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA as we call it. So just want to give you a little bit of background for what SGMA, how SGMA came about, what it means, what the impact is, and so on. So if this works, and I haven't tested it, so indulge me. Oh, there we go. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA as it's referred to, was signed into law by Governor Brown in September 2014, but took effect in January 2015. It does apply to all medium and high priority basins, And those basins are classified based on the Department of Water Resources Bulletin 118, and how they determine whether they're medium or high criticality or high priority is by, as you can see, basin population, the number of public and private wells, irrigated acreage, reliance on groundwater as a primary source, and existing negative impacts, for example, overdraft or water quality degradation. Each one of those criteria were assigned numerical values, and then when you add it all up, whatever your score was, you became medium or high priority. And as you'll see up there, Indian Wells Valley is considered high priority, critically overdrafted basin. Whoops. Okay, so as far as SGMA, the SGMA requires that if you are a critically overdrafted basin, high priority such as Indian Wells Valley, it's required to achieve sustainable management by January 31st, 2040. And related to that, again, if you're a high priority critically overdrafted basin, you have to have a plan to get your basin to sustainability by January 31st, 2020. Obviously, that's coming up very quickly. Sustainable management is defined as an avoidance of undesirable results. It's sometimes referred to as the 6 deadly sins. Some examples up there: chronic lowering of groundwater levels, which is of course one of the criteria which we are experiencing in this basin. Significant and unreasonable reduction to groundwater storage. Significant and unreasonable degradation of the water quality. Land subsidence. Land subsidence due to collapsing the aquifer pore space. As you dewater the aquifer, the ground collapses and you get subsidence. Surface water depletions that have significant and unreasonable impacts on beneficial uses. So each basin that's medium or high priority is required by SGMA to form a groundwater sustainability agency. And the criteria for that agency is that it must consist of a local agency or a combination of local agencies. GSA may have significant planning, financial, regulatory, and enforcement powers, but do not have the ability to determine water rights. There's flexibility in the structure. You can employ a joint powers authority or a memorandum of understanding. Locally, our groundwater authority was formed through a JPA, and that JPA became the GSA through a resolution 0216 that was passed in December 8th of 2016. And our current GSA, if you don't know, is comprised of 5 voting board members, the 3 counties, Kern, San Bernardino, Nino, the City of Ridgecrest, Indian Wells Valley Water District. And then there are 2 what we call associate members, non-voting members. These are federal agencies, the U.S. Navy, China Lake, and the Bureau of Land Management. Again, they're non-voting. The Groundwater Sustainability Agency must solicit and consider the interests and concerns of all communities and parties that rely upon the basin for their water supply. There are a number of tools that are available to the Groundwater Authority provided by SGMA. These are regulatory tools, require registration of wells. And I will mention that an ordinance was passed recently, 0119, that does require all wells to be registered. There are well registration forms in the back if you do have a well and you'd like to pick one of those up. The Sustainability Agency can require measurement of groundwater extraction. It can require annual extraction reports. It can impose extraction limits on individual wells, and it can assess fees to implement the GSP, the Sustainability Plan. Oops, wrong button. The GSP requirements must result in a sustainable condition within 20 minutes. We wish, yeah. 20 years of adoption. Again, as I said earlier on the previous slide, January 2040 is when the deadline is. It has to be approved by the Department of Water Resources. When the plan is submitted, they will look at it, review it, and determine whether or not it is sufficient and meets the criteria. If not, it could be returned, and additional work would have to be done to refine that plan. The GSP has to include information regarding the hydrogeologic conditions in the aquifer, the historical and projected water demands, potential areas of recharge, measurable objectives and milestones towards sustainability. That's critical. You need to identify what your objectives are and when you're going to achieve those objectives. And then a monitoring and management plan. The state, again, like I said, the state will be reviewing it and determining whether or not it is sufficient. They can intervene if the agency is not formed, which we do have an agency. They could intervene if the plan is not adequate. If it's not adequate, they can designate the basin as being probationary, and they must give the JP or the GSA the time to correct any deficiencies that they identify. The intent is for SGMA to be local control of the groundwater. They don't want to intervene. The reality is, I'm sure they don't have the staff to intervene in all these basins, so they want this to be solved locally. If the plan is not adequate, they can impose an interim plan until the GSA develops an adequate plan. And to be quite frank, DWR and State Board were down a couple of years ago when SGMA was first formed, and basically they said, you know, we don't have any tools in our toolbox. They're not really familiar with the basin, so when we come in, all we're going to do is cut everybody back. I don't think, you know, that's not the best approach. And when they do that, of course, as the last bullet point points out, they can impose fees, and they're going to come in, they're going to manage the basin, then they're going to charge us for it. So ideally, what we want to do is solve this ourselves. You know, it took decades to get to this situation. We've been pumping more than the recharge for decades. So solving this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. And we do need the help of everybody. The GSA has formed a couple of committees. There's a policy advisory committee, and some members are here, I see, and a technical advisory committee, and some members are here tonight as well. Those committees were formed to get, consisting of various stakeholders within the basin, to get their input into development of the plan. So introductions, I already did that. Steve Johnson, Jeff Helsley. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve, and he'll go through the plan.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Johnson with Stetson, and as Don pointed out, we're the water resources managers for the newly formed, not really newly in a couple of years, but the newly formed Groundwater Authority. I want to welcome all of you here, and thank you all for coming out. Don was there too, but I happened to be at the last public workshop we had, an annual current that didn't go so well. I think some messages that were sent for that probably didn't land very well. I don't know if they were intended to be that way. I know we didn't intend it to be that way, but they certainly didn't land very well. But I think hopefully we're going to do a lot better on this one, and try to show as much as we can how we're all trying to work together on this thing. I've got, as Don mentioned, I've got Jeff Helsley here with me. You're all familiar with Heather Steele. She's back working in the office. She did get the redrafted GSP out for public comment with public comment period. Well, not just the other day. Yep, she did get it out. I found out today that she was there till midnight this last week working on this thing to get it out, because she said she would get it out, and she did. So she is a trooper. This particular workshop, public workshop on the draft GSP, was actually recommended by Mick Gleason at a board meeting, and we remembered it, we talked about it, and I know there was discussion back and forth whether it would be a board workshop or just a public workshop, and said it would be a public workshop. But as Don pointed out, we have 3 board members here. We've got Nick, and we've got Ron, and we've got Scott. So we've got the city, we've got the Kern County, and we've got the water district here. And I think as Don pointed out, we've also got the chairs of our TAC on our pack. We've got Adam here, and we've got David and Janice here. So I didn't see where Scott sat down, but I know he's here. So we have people here who are heavily invested and heavily involved in what we're doing on a regular basis. I'm in the meetings and coordinating agendas and minutes and trying to get through things. So hopefully if there's questions that come up and it's appropriate for one of the board members or somebody to answer, we can solicit them to come up and answer your questions or talk with you folks too. So, as I pointed out, the GSP, the draft GSP now is out for review, for public review in preparation for the public hearing at the board meeting in January. So there's a time requirement to get it out for review. It's now out. During this process of the public review, comments that we receive in writing or at the meeting. At the meeting, going to be tough. We put those together before we submit it to DWR. But comments we get in writing from the period of the public outreach going forward, we will respond in writing to what we did with those comments. Comments we've received so far, we aren't preparing responses. We're just addressing the things we think need to be addressed, the things we're not addressing, we're setting aside. But once we open the public hearing or the public input part of this process, we will be required to respond in writing, and we will be doing that. So you'll see written responses when the final GSP comes out. So I wanted to point that out. I mentioned the annual card, and one of the things I wanted to start with, because we've been told more than once, we've been told more than once about this, but I want to make sure that the tone of the meeting, try to make sure the tone of the meeting is presented properly and what we're trying to do and what we're all trying to do. And without going back to that particular meeting, just generally everybody to understand that this whole Sigma process that Don described, it's not a voluntary process that everybody, that somebody's decided we should do or we're not do. It's been legislated by the state, it's mandated. It wasn't our idea, it wasn't the water district's idea or the county's idea, it wasn't our staff teams or attorney's idea. It's something that was mandated, and we've just been pulled together to try to figure out a way to implement it. So the big picture on this is we're trying not to have anybody be adversarial or have anybody be enemies on this process. We're trying to make it so that we're trying to work together on solutions. We're trying to do that. I know that there's been concerns, and there will probably continue to be concerns about transparency and what's being done and decisions being made. I know that's a problem. It's still a difficult process, but the general goal and the efforts we're trying to make are for as much transparency and involvement and input on plans, input on alternative plans. We've got some really good input on alternative plans. And you'd be surprised to hear how some of the input on plans, alternative plans or approaches that we've gotten, how they circle around, and when we're sitting around talking with the staff team, how they come up again and we look at it and say, well, that's just like the one that was presented before. We're back to that one again, trying to figure out what works best. So there is a lot of work being done by the staff to try to figure out what actually works best. General comment about the whole idea of Sigma and not being voluntary and where we are. The idea of sustainability, I know it's difficult for this basin. I know it's different for the Ridgecrest area, the Indian Wells Valley, but you're not alone. It's going to be a very difficult process statewide. We're out in front of it right now. There's a few others that are doing this. I think we're about as proactive as any of the basins, trying to evaluate and make some decisions and try to implement a sustainability plan. We're probably as aggressive and proactive as there is out there, because there are a lot of other critical overdraft basins too. But as they address their problems, there's going to be a whole slew of them right behind them. There's basins throughout the state that are going to have to do this. So you're not alone. Everybody's going to be sharing in this process and some of the pain. I want to reiterate the tone of the thing and just emphasize that we really are. I mean, I don't live up here, but since we started working up here, since Mick hired me, Mick was the one that made the call to hire me, which was pretty cool. But since we've been hired up here, we've actually felt like we're part of the community. We actually love everybody. We really like the community. I love it up here. And so when I say we're in this together, I mean that we are really in this together. We understand the pain. We hear you when you talk about the different parties, the different interests, and what the pains are. We are all in this together. We all have to figure out the solution and make it work. And I'm going to give you a little bit of details. Jeff's going to do a lot of detail on the plan and what's in it and where we're headed. I'm going to do a little more general, and I hope the little bit of general up front will help as you hear the more specifics of the plan, understand why it's general and why the specifics aren't as specific as maybe somebody wanted them to be. But I'm going to try to give you a little general overview about how that all works and what we're trying to fit in, you know, the different interests in all of this. So in general, you know, this getting to the actual draft GSP and reviewing it, bringing it before the board, going through the process, and ultimately adopting the GSP and submitting it to the DWR. The way we are right now, and the way we're headed, I mean, literally, and you're asking, one of the questions that was out there is to try to describe what the impacts are to all the classes of bumpers. We've heard it from the PAC. PAC chairman's told me about 15 times in my ear, you need to talk about this, you need to talk about what the impacts are to all the classes. It's not easy to do that, but I can tell you certain things, and one of the things I can tell you is the way we're headed and where we are right now in the basin with the overdraft that we have, you know, effectively, the way we're headed, every class of pumper that pumps water from the basin, and even the water users that use the water, implementation of the plan, whether it's short-term, long-term, but the implementation of the plan that we put together, every class of pumper and water user is going to feel some kind of impact. And I don't like to use the word pain, but there's going to be some kind of pain in dealing with this because we are so overdrafted that every class is going to have some level of impact. And depending on how it all plays out and what the board actually decides to do with the different classes and how we're going to allocate the water that's available, every class is going to have impact. So you need to know that and know going forward that you're involved and you're seeing how it's going to be put together. You're going to see where we're going with it and try to understand why it's being done this way. But you're not the only person. Other people are having the same kinds of impacts. It's spread around as much as we can and as fair as we can, as the board can. Big picture, okay? The basin is significant. Is this thing still on? Because it is. The basin is significantly overdrafted. We're over pumping a lot. I think everybody knows that. It's been going on for a long time. And the overdraft that's occurring is occurring to your community as basin's water supply. So it's affecting everybody. As your water is being overdrafted, the more we overdraft it, the harder it is going to get it to recover, the harder it is going to get sustainability. So this is your basin, and the overdrafting has been occurred for a long time. No finger pointing as to why it's happened, but literally it has been going on a long time. There's been impacts going on for a long time. We all have to get around that and understand that something going forward under the schedule that the authority adopts and implements, something has to change and something has to happen. When it comes to overdrafting like that, when you look at the numbers we're talking about overdraft, which are significant, I mean, you step back, there's really only a couple ways we have, a couple big tools we have to address this. One is cut back the extractions from the basin, reduce them. And the question comes up, and as we talk about impacted people, who's impacted? Okay, who's going to cut back? You know, who's going to cut back and who's not, and how much pain is there going to be when you cut back? We have to cut back a lot. If you're not going to cut back, or if you're not going to cut back enough, the other option is you need new water. Okay? The plans that are being talked about, some of the discussions about new water, if you're talking about things like recycled water, which is in the plan, conservation, which is cutting back, but you know, conservation is a form of water supply. But if you're looking at recycled water, if you're looking at conservation, if you're looking at brackish water as a supply, if you're looking at ideas like, well, we've talked about new studies, which we're having a problem doing new studies and looking at other things. We're looking at new studies to see if there's more storage down there that we can overdraft longer or something like that. All of those answers are not going to get you where you need to go. There's not enough water available on all those alternatives. That's what we worked on all this time through the TAC, to the PAC to a certain extent, but we're very highly qualified folks on the TAC. We've worked through those alternatives. It's clear, folks, that there's not enough supplemental water between recycled water, brackish water, which is not a new source. It's got impacts to the basin, conservation. There's not enough water supply to get us where we need to go. And if you move into the next category of imported water supplies, depending on where you get it and what the source is and what it's used for, imported water is going to be very expensive. So if you've got the two tools in front of you, you've got cutbacks and you've got imported water supply. The GSP, generally what it does is try to use both of those tools to get where we want to go. There are cutbacks included, but the cutbacks get us to a point where we're not overdrafting the basin near as much as we have in the past, but we still overdraft the basin while we work toward bringing imported water supplies in. In the process, we're looking at other projects like recycled water, increase to recycled water, conservation, we're looking at possibly conservation. But the bottom line is, the real goal is get your cutbacks down, reduce the amount of overdraft, try to conserve what you have in your basin water supply, that's your reserve supply going forward. When it's gone, it's gone. So we want to conserve it as much as we can going forward, while we give ourselves time to put together a plan to bring imported water to the basin. When we talk about imported water to the basin, I'm just going to give you guys some cold hard information about what we've learned so far on imported water. Two sources. One of them is from LADWP water supply, where we would figure out some kind of an exchange agreement. No details right now, but ultimately we would make LADWP whole on their water supply by acquiring some other water supply, and then we would take some water supply off the aqueduct and replenish our basin and supply the folks here to help the basin. There's a little bit of opposition there, and some of it's coming from Owens Valley, from Inyo County, and it's understandable. They've had fights for decades up there with LAWP about water, and one of the things that you folks need to understand and hear very clearly is they are clearly telling us that I'm going to go out in front of them a little bit by saying that getting water from that source is not off the table. They kind of said it is, but I don't think it is. It's not off the table. Off the table. But getting water from that source, when they are hurting for water so bad, and bringing it into the Indian Valley and using it for agricultural purpose, for irrigating agricultural lands, is a non-starter for them. And I mean, they are adamant. Now, I don't know for sure that we can't do something there. You know, I'm not saying it's completely off the table, but I can tell you right now, they are adamant about that supply, because their position in that area, in that county, is they don't have enough water for their own ag. They're darn well not going to help us put water in the desert for ag down here. So we have a problem there on that source. That is the cheapest source of imported water to our basin, okay? Right now. It's not cheap. It's $1,000, $2,000 an acre. It is not cheap, but that is our cheapest source. It relates right back to cutbacks. In order to do something like that, we've got major cutbacks. The other source is ABEC, which comes up from the south. Much more expensive water supply. Probably physically more doable. Water supplies we can probably get the water supplies to supplement their supply and bring them up here. Huge cost for infrastructure. It's a long way away. It's coming from effectively California city areas. So it's a long way away. So that's a major project. There are grants, loans, there's all kinds of ways to pay for infrastructure that we are looking at and will continue to look at to help reduce that cost. But it is a big, big number. So with that source of supply, well, you know, maybe cutbacks aren't so severe. Maybe we don't have to get rid of all ag if we bring in that supply. But the fact of life is, if we do that source of supply, okay, and we bring that very, very expensive water up here, ag's going to have to pay for it too. And I don't know how much ag can stand on this type of water. It's very expensive water that we're talking about bringing up. So the last thing we want to do, and we've got to puzzle through this, the last thing we want to do is focus on a project like that to try to placate ag, because we can't get it from LADWP, and then by the time we get it here, ag says we can't afford the water, they go away anyway, and the residents here are stuck with the cost. So that's part of the dilemma we're working through. The tools are cutbacks and imported water. Those are the tools that are going to solve our sustainability problem. We can take little steps to get there, but those are the tools that are going to solve our problem. So, when we talk about, I'm going to try to a little bit touch on Dave Janice's request that we talk about the classes really quick, okay? When we talk about cutbacks, okay, we're looking at the certain classes like municipal, de minimis pumpers, the domestic well owners, mutual water companies, we're talking about Navy, and what we see from just looking at that is, even with conservation, whatever we try to do, generally speaking, what we see in the community, this is not my decision, but what we see in the community is those classes of users have to survive for this to be a community. For Ridgecrest to survive, those classes of users have to survive, including the Navy, right? Navy will not be cut back, okay? The Navy has a Federal Reserve right. They will not be cut back. So when we start allocating water to those users that have to survive, with the Navy and some of these users that we currently have right now, we're already over our sustainable yield. We're past it just with those users. So when we look at that, all of our, it's roughly, just so you know, it's about 7,650 acre feet that we've run through the TAC, we've done the studies. Everybody's generally agreed that about 7,600 acre feet a year long-term replenishes our basin. When you look at Navy, you look at Water District, you look at de minimis, you look at mutuals, we're already well over that. So that's no ag, that's not even small ag. So we've got big decisions to make about going forward. Those users have to stay. Now, if ag, what we're looking at going forward is if ag can stay and afford to stay, they're going to be paying in the cost for that imported water supply. It's going to be very expensive. And like I said, the last thing we want to do is plan that way and then be stuck with the bill for a water supply that we don't need for ag because they're not able to afford it. And we've heard at the last joint TAC-PAC meeting that cost of water, we've heard it from Mojave Pistachio. I'm not talking out of turn because I know it's true. We've heard it from Mojave Pistachio. Their concern is that the authority will basically run them out of business by using the cost of water. And the answer is the cost of water is going up, and it's going to go up for everybody. If a water district has to pay it, then certainly, and the water users have to pay it, then certainly ag should have to pay it. And everybody has to be able to afford it, because if you're going to stay, you have to be able to afford the water. So that's the question. The last thing I wanted to say, that's as close as I'm going to get to individual impacts. I talked about it in general. Okay, David, Jeff might have a little more. So I wanted to close with, I said it already, but the point I wanted to make here is that the two tools we've got, cutbacks, imported water. The other things we're talking about are all well and good. They need to be done. They're extremely important that we do, because in order to get support for what we want to do with things like imported water, we have to demonstrate that we've done the other things. We can't go out and look for outside water supply, supplemental water, and bring it in this basin until we can demonstrate we've done our homework here. And that means conservation, and that means recycled water, that means looking at the brackish water project. Can it provide us a buffer? Can it provide us a bridge to where we need to get to go? Possibly. Is that our answer? Answer is, I can tell you right now that from what we know today, the answer is no, it's not your solution. But we have to show we've done due diligence in the basin to solve our issues before we can get a whole lot of cooperation from other areas that have water and figure out a way to negotiate that supply to supplement ours so that we can maintain the community the way it is. So, I did that without PowerPoints, and I generally talk too long anyway. But I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. He has a fairly long PowerPoint. I appreciate everybody saving their comments and questions until after Jeff finishes, Dawn finished, and I finished. One other thing I wanted to point out, there was a discussion, I want to be transparent as we can. There was a discussion, I asked the question, I didn't know the answer, but there was a discussion of whether or not legal counsel should be here. Whether the legal counsel for the authority, Jim Worth, should be here, or whether special counsel, Jim Martin, should be here. And the answer was, for multiple reasons, the answer to me was no, they're not going to be here. So, doesn't mean you can't ask legal questions. We cannot answer them, so you know that. There has been litigation filed against the Water District and Searles water supplies and things. That's a separate deal. But that does impact our ability to, anybody's ability to answer a legal question. Once the litigation has been filed, it kind of ties things up a little bit. But that's not the only reason. We can't answer legal questions because we're not attorneys, and I don't want to speculate, and I don't want to mislead anybody. So legal questions, you're welcome to answer them. You can submit them, writing, or whatever. We'll pass them on, but this isn't the place, this workshop is not the place to deal with legal questions that we might have going forward. And I think that's all I have, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Ellison.
Good evening. The presentation I have today, this is supposed to be the public workshop. And certainly there are many members of our technical advisory committee and our policy advisory committee that have been very involved in this, been numerous presentations, and very familiar with the details. This presentation is a little more general, trying to get out for people who haven't been involved in the process or are new to this. Take some of the major points out of our groundwater sustainability plan and present them for people so they have some background. Nobody's had a chance to, I wouldn't think, I know people stayed up all night the last time we released a draft reading some of this, but I doubt if anybody's had a chance to read the public review draft that I think just became available yesterday. But we'll take the major points in it to help the public, who certainly hasn't had a chance to read that document, have some background when they do read it. So this is what I'm going to go over. It is long, but I'm not going to do a lot of detail on all these. A few things to say about the GSP itself. Talk a little bit about this, just a list of the stakeholders. There's a lot of detail in the plan itself about the basin setting. I'm not going to go into that much detail, just a few points we wanted to bring out here. Talk about what our problem is. Steve's talked about it in general. We've got a few numbers and graphs about what the problem is with overdraft. The sustainability plan is required to have a goal, a general description of where it is we're trying to go, what we want to do with our plan. We're required to have some sustainable management criteria. Those are some numbers, some measurements we'll make to measure whether we are sustainable, whether we're getting there. We've got proposed projects and management actions. We've done some prediction based on those projects and management actions about what the water levels and the conditions of the basin will be in the future. We've got to talk a little bit about implementation, the potential. I do have a little bit of a general talk about the impacts to the stakeholders and groundwater users, and then talk about our review process. So a few points I wanted to make about the plan is this is not a detailed engineering document. This is a planning document to provide us with a framework and a roadmap for basin management to get us to sustainability by 2040. It does consider the unique uses and users we have here and the unique hydrogeology of this basin. It's an adaptive management plan. We've done projections about what we think these plans will get us to by the year 2040, but as we go through the process of implementing this, when we have new information, if things don't respond the way we think they do, we can change the plan. The GA board can change the plan to try and meet the goal that we've set if we need to. Yep, that's the one. The stakeholders, of course, all the groundwater producers are stakeholders in this, but beyond that, any local agency, and of course the Navy is, and some of these are also groundwater pumpers, but not every business that pumps groundwater, they may get their water from the water district, but this still, as the cost of water goes up or as our water quality is impacted, all of these stakeholders could be impacted and have an interest in this. This is just a list of the sections that are in the GSP, and I'm not going to, as I did, we had a workshop with the TAC and the PAC. I'm not going to go through the detailed outline of it again. But as far as basin setting, for those who are new to the process, there's the limits of the groundwater basin on the left. It's basically all of the valley floor up to the hills. There's general location of the wells in the basin on the right-hand figure there, and you can see they're concentrated in certain areas. This is an illustration of how the groundwater basin works. There's on the left-hand side there the Sierra Nevadas, and you've got runoff or mountain front recharge really from the mountains into the groundwater basin, and all the surrounding other, besides the Sierra Nevadas, the other mountains contribute recharge into the groundwater basin to a lesser degree. We've got inflow from Rose Valley. As far as outflows, we've got groundwater pumping, of course. There's evapotranspiration down in the lower areas in the playa, and there's also a little bit of outflow into Salt Wells Valley. So those are the things that where water comes into that's how water comes into the basin and how water goes out of the basin. And here's starting to look at some of the numbers about what goes into the basin and out of the basin. Of course, in this basin, drinking water, the sole source of drinking water in the valley and in the basin is the groundwater. We've had an overdraft condition since probably at least the 1960s. And overdraft means we've got more water being taken out of the basin than is being naturally recharged into the basin. And as a result of that, our groundwater levels have continuously gone down in most areas, and we've continued to lose the amount of storage in groundwater. The amount of water that's available underground has decreased. The numbers are on the right there, but basically we've worked with the TAC, and the best estimate we have is that the long-term recharge of the basin is about 7,650 acre-feet a year. When we look at all of the outflows, the total amount of water that's being overdrafted, that is the deficit between what's coming out of the basin and what's going in the basin, in recent times is probably on the order of 25,000 acre-feet a year. And this is a hydrograph. That's a graph of groundwater levels, and this particular well's up north of, it's in the vicinity of 395, north of the junction of 14 and 395. And those lines are groundwater levels over since about 1993, 1995, show continuous decline. And there's three different lines for one well because it measures groundwater levels at three different levels in the different strata in the groundwater basin. And this well's just west of town here, shows the same trend, continually declining groundwater levels. And there's a red arrow on that map to show where the well's located. And then this one's up on the Naval Weapons Station on the east side of the Little Lake Fault, the Baker Range area, and you see a less drastic decline in water levels. It's farther from all the pumping that's going on, but it's still a continually declining groundwater level. One of the other things we're concerned about is water quality. This is sort of three different levels or depths in the groundwater basin. And the colors depict different concentrations of total dissolved solids. The blue being the better quality water, where we'd like to have the concentrations of what we call TDS for drinking. And as we go from blue to green to kind of a dirty yellow to reds, those are worse quality water. And as we go, get into the green area and beyond, that water is really not suitable for drinking or for agriculture anymore. And even the green has impacts on ag. And as we get to the higher levels in that band of concentrations, there are issues with drinking it too. So as you can see, there's a large area out on the Naval Weapons Station in the deep water that's very poor quality, but coming much closer to where we had seen the wells earlier, there's some poor quality water too in all the zones. So there's a great concern about continuing to pump the basin and these poor quality water continuing to move towards the pumping that's going on. we've seen impacts already from overdrafting the basin, particularly on shallow wells. There have been wells that have lost production or either had it reduced or not been able to produce the water that's needed, so they've had to be deepened or replaced, or in some cases, if the area got too low, it couldn't be used at all. We did an estimate that maybe as many as 97 shallow wells have been impacted since 1980. I'm sorry, since 1980. And that was all shallow wells. That's not counting what might be water quality impacts, because there have been impacts of water quality changing and impacting the ability to use some shallow wells. So one of the things we did in preparing the GSP was try and project in the current practices, what would the basin look like in 50 years? The SGMA legislation required us to look at a 50-year planning horizon to go from 2020 to 2070. So what if we didn't have a management plan? So we have a computer model, a numeric model of the groundwater basin that we use to project that forward and try and predict what the basin would look like then. And these, there's multiple monitoring points depicted on that graph on the left of groundwater levels, again from 2020 to 2070, almost all of which show steeply declining water levels. There is one line there that it looks kind of vertical, but actually is declining very slightly, and that's out in the El Paso area, an area where there's not a lot of pumping going on. There's a barrier somewhat between that area and the main part of the basin. There's also not a lot of recharge going on out there either off of the mountains. So that shows that if we don't manage the basin, our groundwater levels will continue to drop significantly. This graph is showing how much water would be taken out of storage, or how much we would reduce the water that's underground over that same period, that 50-year period. And what it's showing is that the computer model estimated we'd take about 1.6 million acre feet out of water, out of the groundwater basin that wouldn't be replaced between 2020 and 2070. This is a graph shows what we put into the model, what we asked it to pump, how much water we asked it to pump out of all the wells that we had put into the model. And there's actually a black line there and a blue line there. The black line is what we asked the model to produce. And most of the time, the black line matches the blue line, so you can't see the two of them. The model took all the water out that we asked it to, but when we got out to around the year 2065, the groundwater levels were so low that the wells that were in the model could not produce all of the water that we asked them to. So based on the way the model is set up, which has some simplifications in it, it was telling us if we continue pumping the way we are, and we got some input on what future plans were for pumping by some of the major pumpers, and if they implemented those plans, the wells in the basin as they stand now, the model projected would not be able to produce all of the water that is needed by the year 2065 after 1.6 million acre feet had been removed from the basin. That caused a great deal of concern. It started to give us, as I mentioned, we've seen the impacts already on shallow wells, we've seen water quality changes, but this is starting to limit our water supply, at least with the wells that we have now. It was one of the driving forces in trying to formulate the plan, is to try and realize that we can't remove 1.6 million acre feet, 1.6 million acre more feet than we already have from the basin, and that we needed to address that. As Steve pointed out, that reduction, that impact of not being able to produce all of the water, that doesn't consider water quality impacts. some of the wells that we show pumping, up until 2065 might not be able to pump. If we consider water quality, we just didn't have our water quality part of the model working when we did that projection. So it actually could be worse than that when you consider quality. So the plan has a sustainability goal, and that goal is to manage and preserve the basin groundwater resource as a sustainable water supply. To the greatest extent possible, the goal is to preserve the character of the community, preserve the quality of life of Indian Wells Valley residents, and sustain the mission at Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake. And these are sigma terms. The absence of undesirable results will indicate that the sustainability goals have been achieved. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainability criteria, which are the way we're going to measure whether we're meeting those goals. We'll have things that we can measure that tell us whether we're meeting that goal also. So, next slide is a little bit on the sustainable management criteria. Sigma requires us to establish ways to measure what the potential impacts are, to measure whether we're avoiding them, and to measure whether we're on a path to avoid those and meet the goals that we've set for ourselves. They're numerical values, and there are three terms I'll use briefly. One of them is a minimum threshold, there's a measurable objective, and then there's an interim milestone. And I've got a graph just to illustrate what those are. There is a data management system that's been set up. It's on a website. The website's listed there. As we go forward, and after the plan is adapted, we'll put these criteria, this data that we're going to use to measure whether we're meeting our goal or not, will be measured and presented in that data management system for everyone to access. Right now it's up and running, and it has a lot of historical information, groundwater levels, and a lot of other information in it, so it can be accessed to look at data on the groundwater basin right now. So this graph is showing the amount of water that's coming out of storage from 2020 to 2070 if we implement the management actions and projects that are recommended in the groundwater sustainability plan. This may not look that good either. When we were showing that line about how much water we were taking out when we projected in the future with no management, we took out 1.6 million acre feet. With our management actions and projects, this graph here is showing that by 2070, we might take out around 215,000 acre feet of water out of storage. We'll talk a little bit, we can't stop immediately. So this is what's needed to allow some transition and before we get our basin into sustainability. That green line towards the bottom there, that's our objective, is where we want to end up at the end of our 50-year planning period is to only have taken out 215,000 acre feet. So that's our goal. There's kind of a red or orange line down below that. That's our minimum threshold, and that just means we don't want to get to that point. We'd like to get to the green line. We definitely don't want to get to the red line, and if we do, we need to make some changes in our plan. And then you'll see some kind of yellow diamonds there along the way over time on that line. Those are our interim milestones. That's going to help what we're going to use every 5 years until 2040, because we are supposed to be in sustainability in 2040. Those diamonds there are the points we want to try and hit to show we're on the path to sustainability. If we get off of them, it doesn't mean we're failing. It's just it gives us pause. We need to step back and look and say, why aren't we hitting that? Maybe there's a reason, and over time it's going to average out and we'll get back on track. If we don't think so, that's one of our early warnings that we may need to change the plan again if we're not hitting our interim milestones, it's called. So that's what they call the sustainable management criteria for reduction in storage, which is one of the things which practically is a very big concern in this basin, and is also one of the things that Sigma and the state require us to look at. This is again a groundwater graph of the groundwater elevations at one monitoring well, MW32. And the light blue line that jumps up and down a lot, that's actually historical data from the mid-1990s until the present. And then the darker kind of squiggly line that doesn't jump around quite as much are our predictive model results. When we put our management actions and projects into the model, it shows that by the year 2025, at least at this particular location, our groundwater levels should stop declining. And in fact, in this location, they start to recover somewhat. So here we've set our objective is the green line, is we'd like to get our groundwater level at this location where that green line is set by the year 2040. And what we don't want to do is have groundwater levels continue to decline and have the level get down to where that red line is. That, again, would be a cause for us if at the year 2040 or after we're getting down to that level, we need to reevaluate our plan and see what changes need to be made. And it also has the yellow diamonds on it to show the path we hope we will take to get to our objective in 5-year increments out to 2040. This is one of our sustainability criteria for water quality. And there are, I should mention, I showed you one slide for the change in storage, and really there is just one set of sustainability criteria or one location or one overall basin-wide sustainable criteria for change in storage. I then showed you the sustainability criteria for groundwater levels. We're actually going to have several representative monitoring wells we're going to use throughout the basin where we set those criteria. So we're not setting it on one point, we're setting it on points throughout the basin, not every well, but some representative wells, so we can track throughout the basin whether the whole basin is moving towards the goals. And this is just one of our water quality location, sustainability criteria locations for water quality. There will be several others. This is one of the water district's well 30. And the blue dots are actual TDS, total dissolved solid concentrations, historic. There's a little blue dashed line that you might not be able to see. That's the trend of all that historic data. It shows that it's generally been going up. The TDS concentration has been going up, although it's still relatively good for this particular well. But it is headed up. So we took where we set the criteria here is the state has some maximum levels that they want to see some of these constituents at, particularly TDS. And for TDS, the secondary goal, the lower secondary goal for water quality set by the state is that your TDS not be any higher than 500 milligrams per liter. That's where we've set the red line there, or our minimum threshold. At this location, we don't want the water quality to violate the state's lower standard for this constituent. And we've actually said, the blue line is the goal that we wanted to get to. We've done a little bit of modeling on water quality. We also looked at this well when our management actions and projects would affect the water levels or stop the declining water levels in this area. And our goal is that the water quality actually get no worse than it is right now. It looks like for this, not all of the wells is that possible, but it looks like in this location, that might be a possible thing to do. So I've mentioned the projects and management actions before. We've spent quite a bit of time trying to develop these. We've considered different ones. We've modeled them with different assumptions, looked at several different scenarios about how we would implement these. We had discussions with both the board, the TAC, the PAC, and many of those meetings also. So our first management action is an annual pumping allocation plan that includes a transient pool and a fallowing program. Now, the annual pumping allocation, this is a process. The GSP, and adopting the GSP doesn't set the allocations. Adopting the GSP says we're going to go through a process to set allocations. So there are no final allocation numbers in here. We have to go through a process that's laid out. It will assign annual pumping, well, actually, it will, what we're going to use it for is not to directly restrict pumping, but the allocations will be a tool, will be something we use when we set fees on pumping. Steve mentioned the imported water cost. These allocations are going to come into play about when you pay for an allocation for what we're calling an augmentation fee. That's a critical feature. All pumpers actually can continue to pump. The groundwater sustainability plan doesn't tell anybody you have to stop pumping. But if, and down towards the lower part, what it will do is allocate the natural yield of the basin to pumpers. That I mentioned that the long-term average natural recharge of the groundwater basin is 7,650 acre-feet a year, we estimate. This allocation process will allocate that amount of water to the various pumpers. And if you pump above your allocation, that's when you have to start paying a augmentation fee. And it will be, we don't know the number yet. We know that imported water is expensive, so we know it's going to be a large number. But there's going to have to be a whole process on setting exactly what that fee is. Some of the things that will be considered in the allocation process are federally reserved rights. Steve mentioned those. That's a very high priority water right. The Navy, when the Navy base was, the land up there was set aside for the Navy, Congress set aside, the courts have determined processes long ago that the intent was that enough water be set aside for the use on which that land was intended. That's a very high water right. We will not have the ability to reduce, this local GA has no authority over the Navy to begin with. They have no ability to charge them fees. The local agency cannot charge them fees. So we will not be able to tell them what they can and can't do. We will look at California water rights law when we are setting these allocations. We'll look at different beneficial uses. Historical groundwater production is used in groundwater law to set allocations and to set water rights. We will not be setting water rights, but we'll be looking at historical pumping as a way to look at allocating this safe yield for the purpose of fees. And then we'll also look at water requirements for health and safety for the people in the valley. And the board will be, with input from many attorneys, engineers, the public, will be discussing after we adopt the GSP through a process how we consider all the things that are listed there. So, there's also a concept of having what we're calling the transient pool. And this would be in addition, not addition, there would be a block of water that will be made available to entities that don't get an annual pumping allocation as sort of a cushion between when the allocations are made and the fees start incurring, to give them a cushion or a transition when if it's not going to be economic for them to pump. They recognize that when the fees set and the allocation set that this just isn't economic. It's a cushion, so they don't have to necessarily stop right away. There's a number of about 51,000 acre-feet total that would be distributed, mentioned in the plan. That's not a final number, that's just based on some of the modeling we've done and that amount of water that we wanted to take out of storage, trying to limit how much water we take out of storage to what I'd shown as being our goal. That's about the amount of water we can allow on top of what we think the annual pumping allocations will be, and what we think people who are able to pay the augmentation fee will continue to pump. So that pool of water it's one time, we're going to allocate that 51,000 acre feet out, and it doesn't, or the board will, and it doesn't replenish. Once it's used, it's gone. The thought is, and again, this all needs to be worked through the board, is it probably won't be subject to the augmentation fee or the imported water cost. That's where the benefit of that, having that pool comes from, to the pumpers that use it. There we go. Part of this management action will also include a fallowing program. That's what we're calling it. Basically, it's sort of an ability to sell essentially your allocation back. If you make a determination, if you're eligible for an allocation and you determine, for whatever reason you'd rather not use it, there'll be the ability to sell that back to the groundwater authority. This slide is actually incorrect, and I'm not sure why, but it carried forward a mistake we had in the draft of the groundwater sustainability plan that we gave to the PAC. And the TAC, it said that the value of that water would be the fair market value of the land, and that's not. We'd use that as a way to gauge a value, but that's not intended to be the value of what this water will be worth. That's going to have to be determined in a process with the board and all the stakeholders also. So that is not in the public review draft of the plan. We anticipate that once these allocations are made and the augmentation assessment is in place, that will reduce our pumping down to probably around 12,000 acre feet a year. That would be the allocation that's given, plus pumping by people who will be able to afford the augmentation fee. That doesn't include the transient pool. So there'll be some pumping we think in the early years of the transient pool, but once that water is all pumped out, our average pumping will probably be more like the 12,000 acre feet a year. Let's go to the next slide. As I mentioned a few times, we estimate the long-term natural replenishment of the basin is 7,650 acre feet a year. And I just mentioned we think that the long-term pumping under that allocation is probably going to be more like 12,000 acre feet a year. So we're still not sustainable. We're still taking more water out of the basin than is being put back in. And as Stephen mentioned, that's why we need another water supply. That's why we need an imported water supply. So we've developed a couple of potential projects for the purpose of the groundwater sustainability plan, like 2 different ways to get imported water that need to be explored further, and decide on one and go forward with that. Steve mentioned them in his opening remarks. One of those is to go out into the water market, probably in Central California, and buy some water rights. We would then have that water transported through the State Water Project in Central California. That would get water down to the Antelope Valley, and there's an agency there, the Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency, that is part of the group of state water contractors that has access to the infrastructure that brings water from Central California over into Antelope Valley. They have a pipeline where they deliver water up to California City. That's the closest location where any Central Valley water gets to Antelope Valley. So this project concept is we buy the water rights in Central Valley, put it through the State Water Project over to Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency. they pump it in their pipeline to California City. We would need to build a pipeline from California City up to this basin. It's a long pipeline, and we need some booster stations to get it here. The water that's in the pipeline to California City is treated water, ready to use drinking water. So the concept is we pipe that water directly to the water district and others who have a need for potable water, and they would use that directly, and that would offset some of the groundwater that they're using, and thereby get the pumping down. The other concept is again to go out to Central California and buy state water project rights, and we take that water and have it transported down to the city of LA for their use, and in exchange for that, they would give us some water out of the aqueduct here in the valley. That water is not treated. It's not, you can't just, the state won't allow you to just drink it right out of the aqueduct. So the proposal is to recharge it into the groundwater basin over near the Inyo Kern, or north of the Inyo Kern area. Recharge it into the groundwater basin and let it travel underground throughout the basin to balance that little bit of overpumping that we're going to have. One of the other projects that's proposed in the plan is to try and use all of the available recycled water. There's some use of that now. The city's looking at improving the wastewater treatment plant, upgrading the quality, expanding the capacity. What this project has looked at is how to make use of that better quality treated water. We've kind of come up with 3 parts to this. There's 2 parts that are landscape irrigation. Identified some sites in the city, some of which are right here around the park. All the grass areas right around us right here could use recycled water. There might be some areas, additional areas over at Nas China Lake that could use some recycled water. And then we have another kind of a sub-project to take it to Cerro Coastal Community College and irrigate up there. It's more pipe to get it up there, but there are some uses. And then any of the water that we don't put to use for irrigation, we need to treat it to a higher quality, and then we could inject it into the groundwater basin and have it replenish some of the groundwater that's being pumped up by everyone. That's a much more expensive water, source of water, but it's a good quality, and we want to make sure we use all of our local water sources that are available. My next project, as Steve mentioned, water conservation. There's of course been water conservation activities before. There's some now ongoing. What the Groundwater Authority would do is get together with all the water users that are interested and see if we can come up with a strategic plan about what else can we do to conserve water. And then the Groundwater Authority with other interested stakeholders would go out and look for some funding. Because the state does, from time to time, make money available for water conservation efforts, and make sure we're implementing as many conservation programs as we can. I mentioned that even under the plan with our actions and our management action and projects, we still are going to be taking some water out of storage. So we're still going to be seeing some declining groundwater levels. So we anticipate, and our groundwater model indicates, we're still going to have some shallow wells that are impacted until we get to sustainability. So there's a mitigation program proposed as part of this plan. We'd spend probably the first year after we implement this plan, or after the board adopts this plan, developing exactly what that mitigation program would be. Working with our TAC, working with our other stakeholders. We've done an outline of that that's presented in the groundwater sustainability plan, what kind of criteria we'd use to determine when there is a significant impact, who's eligible for some mitigation, and how we would go about mitigating that, whether it's drilling deeper wells or deepening existing wells, or whether it's treatment that's needed. Steve alluded to it. We think certainly some agriculture, if not all, will be able in the long term to afford the augmentation fee. If they don't, if they don't have an allocation for the irrigation that doesn't have an annual allocation, that doesn't have an augmentation fee, so they can be agricultural land going out of production. The TAC and the PAC had given us good input that we should be concerned about dust issues from that. So in the first couple of years after adoption, we'd be developing a dust mitigation program. And during that time, we'll have a better idea of, we think of what lands will be going out of production and when they might be going out of production, and we can develop some mitigation actions to address those. Even with all those actions taken that I've described, there still will be some concentrated areas of pumping. So overall, the basin, once we've done all these other steps I mentioned, overall the basin will be more or less in balance, but there'll be a little bit of concentrated pumping. The water district and Searles to some degree, and others have some areas where they would continue to draw down groundwater levels and impact additional shallow wells. So we've got a program that over time we would try and move some of that pumping up to the area where we anticipate the ag is going to stop pumping groundwater. We'd move some of the other pumping to up there to lessen the impact on shallow wells where there's existing concentrated pumping. So we call that a pumping optimization program. Those are the management actions and the projects that are proposed in the GSP, really to mitigate or avoid all the undesirable impacts. We need to implement all of those. It's not a, pick 2 or 3. We need to do all of those things. We have at least a couple of additional projects that could be considered. And one of them is a brackish groundwater project. There's a large study that's been going on for a few years, collected a lot of data, has looked at treatment. Brackish water is just water that has some TDS in it. And it's not potable at the moment, but it could be treated. The thought is that it might just be an interim source of water, because that brackish water is part of the same groundwater basin, so in the long term you're still pumping groundwater, but the thought is it might serve an interim function. So that will continue to be looked at. That study is still ongoing by the Water District and others, and a large number of others, with a lot of outside funding. And the other one, we mentioned recycled water projects. I mentioned irrigation and groundwater recharge with it. There are projects that are being started up where you take recycled water, it's treated wastewater, and you treat it to a very high degree, and you put it into a potable water system. San Diego is working on that. It's been done in Arizona a number of years ago and continues there. That's a use that's in its youth here in California. They're going to start to develop some regulations on how that might be done. There aren't regulations that tell you how to do that now, but they're developing them. We wanted to keep that on the table in case it develops to a point we think it might be feasible. It might turn out to be the best use of the recycled water we had. So we just wanted to make sure we kept that in the plan to be considered in the future. So we took our groundwater model, as I mentioned, and modeled what would the basin look like if we implement all these things. And this is water quality changes from 2020 to 27 over our 50-year planning horizon. And the one on the left is that baseline. That's what if we didn't have any management and people pumped whatever they wanted for going out the next 50 years. This is water level changes, and all that red is bad. I mean, that's groundwater, reductions in the groundwater level of more than 10 feet. You can see almost all the basin goes down more than that. If we look into details, some locations go down 70, 90 feet. The one on the right is our modeling with all of our management actions and projects in place. And, you know, the blues are actually groundwater levels that have come up. We see a lot of yellows and greens there where there's either minor coming up a little bit or still going down a little bit. We still do see some red out there on the east side of the Little Lake Fault, and that's, you know, so far from all of the actions that we're taking, because we don't have management actions. We only have management actions where we have pumping, and we don't have control over any of that pumping out there. It's all off the base. So it still continues to see some declines. Some of that is just how long it takes these actions to reach that far in the basin, the effect of the fault there. Let's go to the next one. This is looking at just a portion of that time period. This is with all of our actions and projects in place. And this is from 2040 to 2070. So we try and reach sustainability in 2040, and this shows you what it looks like from 2040 going forward. So a lot of that red that we saw in the first slide still happens here before we get to sustainability. The changes in groundwater elevations are much better once we get to our sustainability in 2040 and going out to 2070. So this is just a little bit on the timeline. The major things are the intent in implementing the allocation plan, the transit pool, and the following program. It's intended that process start as soon as the groundwater sustainability plan is adopted. So that may be completed in 2020, as soon as 2020. There's a little more detailed schedule in the sustainability plan, and it is showing it being completed, I think, about mid-year in 2020. The imported water project, that's going to take a long time to develop. So we're showing that our goal is to have that implemented by the year 2035. Recycled water in the more immediate future, and the other projects, at least getting the programs in place here in the next few years. There is more details on the schedule and the sustainability plan. Sorry. These are costs for all those projects. The imported water projects are expensive. The implementation or capital costs for the Antelope Valley East Kern project is almost $200 million. The implementation capital cost for the LA Department of Water and Power option is almost $100 million. And a lot of that one is buying water rights over in Central California to have water to use. So those are expensive projects. The Groundwater Authority had actually hired a firm that's involved in the water market and also financing projects, and they've done some preliminary evaluation of the water market, and we used some of the values that they developed for what does it cost to buy water rights in the Central Valley. Some of the costs we just looked at were based on work that they did. They also looked at potential sources of funding, and there's a long list of potential federal sources of funding and state sources of funding, grant programs. They actually had looked at several different bills where we might actually get a designation of money for our projects. There's no guarantee for that. We need to work with Congress, our local delegations, and try to address the serious problem in that space. And they believe there are some opportunities perhaps to get some funding from the state and the federal government. Those are things that would have to be pursued after we adopt the groundwater sustainability plan. And then there are, of course, local. I think we saw the authority has set pumping fees to help pay to prepare this GSP, and they can set fees going forward, including augmentation fee. So the hope is some combination of these public fundings will help offset how much we need for our augmentation fee and be the road to finance the things that we've shown. So some of the general impacts, that's what's in the groundwater, my overview of groundwater sustainability plan, we were asked to talk a little bit about the impacts to stakeholders. You know, Steve mentioned that. We had a few things we had just put on a slide. You know, our de minimis or you know, individual well owners who use less than 2 acre-feet a year, and the mutual water companies, you know, they will be subject to certain of the pumping fees. There may be an administrative fee to help run the groundwater authority. There'll be an augmentation fee to help pay for the projects. You know, there may be a mitigation fee, or we may roll those together. They'll be subject to some of the fees, at least. You know, we may ask them to volunteer and give us input on how we can structure water conservation programs. You know, there may be some mandatory programs that are put in place at some time. And really everybody will benefit. If we get the basin sustainably managed, everybody will benefit from a more reliable supply and avoiding these water quality impacts that we might have if we continue to pump the way that things have been. The Navy, you know, we can't impose any fees on them. They have participated in the development, greatly in the development of this groundwater sustainability plan. The groundwater model we used, they actually had it created, made it available for us to use. It was, you know, it was modified and updated and improved for this use. They've drilled wells, they've contributed greatly to this. We can't charge them, but they've been participating already. They may choose in different ways to participate and support this implementation of this plan in the future. Small and large ag will be subject to certain of the fees going forward. They could get, you know, as I mentioned, they'll get some relief from that, from the transient pool allocations. It won't be subject to the augmentation fee. They'll have the opportunity to determine whether they want to participate in the following program. And you know, any of them that are going to continue, we want to invite them to participate in our water conservation programs. And those that are able to continue, you know, will benefit from the management program. Industrial pumping, you know, this is mainly zeros, would be subject to pumping fees above whatever allocation they might get of the natural safe yield. They're one of the entities we want to talk about potentially. They might explore whether they would have a use for recycled water, and also explore with them if there's additional water conservation they can do in their practices, since they pump groundwater from this basin to use over their operations. You know, the city's pumping is subject to fees. You know, some of these are a little bit repetitive. I'll just point out maybe the differences. Oh, sorry. I guess municipal was the water district. Sorry. Yeah, the water district and others be subject to fees and participate with us in conservation. The city and county are subject to fees also. So, I think you get the idea. Let's go to stakeholder involvement. So we held this meeting to try and get our regulars, although their input has been valuable, but to get the public involved also. And they're invited to participate in the rest of this process to review the GSP, provide comments on our GSP. The board, I'll have a schedule, you know, participate in future meetings. There will be a public hearing for the board to consider adopting the GSP in January. I mentioned there's going to be a lot of these processes that are going to start once we adopt the GSP, and the public's invited to participate in those meetings as we develop the processes for allocations and other things. So we released this public review draft that's out now on the 11th. We've incorporated comments from the TAC and the PAC. They saw drafts of all the chapters. Again, to the TAC and the PAC. Again, very valuable input as always. A lot of comments, a lot of work went into that. It again made it a better document. We did, hopefully you didn't expect us to. We didn't incorporate everybody's comments, and there were various reasons. Some of them were that some of the comments were towards, how to do some of the things as we go forward, and those are comments that will be very useful as we go through the processes I've talked about, as we go work with the board about how to allocate or how to develop a shallow well mitigation program. We got comments on the GSP to incorporate those now, but those comments will be good when we're moving forward and setting up, those different plans and processes. There was some legal comments that we certainly couldn't address. Frankly, there just wasn't enough time. There were some we would still have liked to incorporate. There simply wasn't time, although we tried to get all of them, what we thought were the most important ones. So the public review draft is out. We're requesting written comments by January the 8th. The board is going to hold a hearing on January the 16th to hear any additional comments and consider adopting the plan. If we get written comments by the 8th, we hope to be able to evaluate them, make any changes that we can, that we think need to be made, and also have responses prepared with those for the board and the public to see. And that's the conclusion to my presentation.
So, I thought I talked a lot. Holy mackerel. I know. Just two things I made notes on before I give it back to Dawn so we can start coordinating comments, but just two things. One, I always try to do this, and I didn't do it before, but I want to make sure we acknowledge, just this community and the amount of involvement you guys have, because I've been involved in this type of work for almost 43 years, almost 45 years, a lot of different communities, and unquestionably the amount of involvement in this community is significantly above any place I've ever seen. So it's really good, and the amount of input, the technical input we've gotten, the wealth, the amount of knowledge that's out there that's been provided to us is really very, very impressive. So I wanted to do that first. Secondly, I got questions more than once, and we actually talked about it with the board. And we've talked here a lot about ag and small ag, large ag, and the whole thing. One of the questions that came up, and Don Quist over here asked it, so I'm going to acknowledge that Don asked the question. It's a good question. And he said, when are we going to know what's going on? Because we've got decisions to make. We've got things that have to be done to our crops at different times of the year. And depending on what you guys do, we have decisions to make around those decisions you made. When are we going to know what's going on? And I just wanted to give a level of assurance that I can give is that every effort's going to be made going forward to make sure that the information is out there to allow for a planning horizon for the folks that may have to make changes in their operations, a planning horizon so that that you'll have time to do that before the authority actually implements actions like restricting pumping or imposing fees. So you'll be able to make decisions on the fallowing well before you've invested money and then has to go away. So the whole idea is we hear you, and coordination is going to be really important too on that. So that's all I have.
So at this point, we'll open up for public comment. So if you have a comment, raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone around. Who wants to go first?
Judy Decker, PAC representative for the Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District. Jeff, do you have your pencil? All right, I think I did bring this up in my written comments to you, but I'm going to give them to you again. In your introduction on your ES page 2 and 3, you list the users. You have omitted small agriculture. Please add it. I don't remember the name of the table, but you have several tables where you list the monitoring wells that are used, And you have NR2, which stands for Neil Ranch Monitoring Well 2, and you have it listed as a monitoring well and an agricultural well. That well has never been an agricultural well. It was drilled during the Bureau of Reclamation study to Bureau of Reclamation standards by the Indian Wells Valley Water District. The third thing I have is your use of the word fallowing. I looked up fallowing in several dictionaries. It is an agricultural term that refers mostly to row crops like vegetables, where the land is tilled and left unplanted for a year or so and then replanted. If that's your intention in this document, that the land be replanted, then use the word. If that is not your intention, then you need to find another word. And connected to that is the issue of dust control. If the land is left barren, not watered, after a crop has been on it, no matter what the crop is or was, there is going to be a horrific dust problem. You have dust mitigation listed as project number 5, I believe, on your PowerPoint. Dust mitigation needs to be listed right there with your allocation program and your cessation of farming, because it needs to be done immediately, or we will have Cantil in the Indian Wells Valley. And anybody who's lived here for any length of time knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Cantil and the houses that used to be visible that are now covered with dust.
I'm Don Decker. I'm the TAC member for the domestic well owners. I'd like to acknowledge the really hard work that Stetson and the staff has put into this effort and the document that is being reviewed tonight. The thing that has made the project, and I'm including the committees here in this whole thing also, has been the really compressed timeline. And one of the consequences of that compressed timeline are mistakes. The document still has many, not necessarily substantive, but sentences that don't really make sense, and misspellings and things like the use of the word fallowing. Not to hammer on that, but that is not being used in the conventional way. What it does is, when you use a word out of the usual context, it produces confusion. I don't mean to hammer on that anymore. There are lots of details that we couldn't and shouldn't go over tonight that really should be addressed. There needs to be a cleanup of this document, and I thought that we were going to see that in this revised document. And I see some of the changes that I know I suggested and others suggested. I see them, but it's not necessarily consistent, and there are more now that there's more language in here. There really needs to be a cleanup, and some of these issues really addressed. And the comments that I made, about 12 pages of compact comments and suggestions, included things that I think perhaps you guys are thinking should be left for the implementation part of the plan yet to come, the more detailed implementation. But even a few sentences describing for example, the additional beneficial uses of substantial amounts of reclaimed water would clarify what's actually going to happen. Steve's comment that you guys are trying to put as much detail in here as can be made to provide guidance to those parties affected that's a nice thing to say, and I appreciate it, and I think lots of others do too. But it means that you don't leave out things that really should be there. I'm going to resubmit my first set of comments to you because many of the things that are there I think you should really take a second look at, and I don't mean to stick it to you in any way, but a lot of effort has gone into our comments, and I know you've taken a look at them, but I think another look is important. I think that's all I have.
Anybody else?
Just one quick response, so you know. Just on one of the issues, the following word. It's been mentioned 2 or 3 times. I want to let you know that we heard you when you brought it up, and we have brought it up mostly with legal counsel, and we're generally told to leave it in. So it's not that we did, I don't want you to think we're not hearing you, because we did, and we brought it up, and we'll bring it up again. Because I know it was a suggestion of using something like buyback program or something like that, but there were better words, but I don't want you to think we ignored you, because we did hear you.
Could you put up the cost chart again? Yeah. I'd like to call attention to people, the big numbers on here. This one, we got to add across this way to get the one-time cost. I added them up. They're a little bit different on here than they were on the earlier one. But total cost of the project, if you import from Antelope Valley, is $355 million capital costs. If you go from the LA Aqueduct, it's $232 million. To me, this seems like an awful lot of money for a little town like Ridgecrest. In addition to that, if you look over here in the total annual cost, up here, option 1, $8 million a year, that's per year, to get water in from Antelope Valley, 440, well, almost $4.5 million to get it in from LA Aqueduct. I don't know if these numbers are accurate or not. I know they're estimates. You obviously don't really know. Some of the earlier estimates were quite a lot larger than these. I don't know. I work for the government. Everything is under budgeted and overrun that I've been involved with. Anyway, I think you see my point here. Can we really afford this? Second thing I'd like to say is, when will we know if we begin some of these big projects? Who's going to decide that I've got this big old tax to pay? Will we have a referendum when we decide to import water? Are we deciding tonight that we're going to import water and I'm gonna have to pay for all this stuff? Has anybody thought about that?
That's a very good question.
I mean, you know, when you get a big bill like that, it's gonna be a shock. One other point I'd like to make is, you didn't break it out by how much my share would be. I really think you ought to put that in the plan to say that on average, everybody in Indian Wells Valley is going to have, in addition to their current water costs, this amount extra. Finally, I'd like to say that coming back to the importing water, I think it looks impractical as can be, and I don't consider your plan complete unless you have a branch of your plan or an alternative if the people of Indian Wells Valley decide they don't want to spend all this money on water. I think Mr. Nick Panzer has already made a comment on this, but I'd just like to second his comment that to be a complete plan, you really needed to look at a cheaper way to do this. It may take, you know, every bit of landscaping in Indian Wells Valley goes away, may take, you know, some other drastic measures like with Cyril's Valley, but I really think that if this is to be called a plan, you ought to look at that. So thank you.
I will say that the board is going to consider adopting this plan in January, and that actually doesn't establish any fees. It's a planning document we submit to the state to tell them this is how we plan to get ourselves into sustainability. Their board will go through a process to set fees. You know, that's at the time, the fees on pumping or other fees. That's all part of the implementation of this. So, you know, adopting this plan does not automatically raise anybody's rates. Well, it's the roadmap about where we want to go. We've got to flesh out all the projects. And I just wanted to say we're pumping 28,000 acre feet a year. Eliminating all the landscaping in Ridgecrest doesn't get that pumping down to 7,650. There's drastic things have to be done, unless we get more drastic things than we're proposing have to be done if we don't get an import water supply. But I don't deny that those are expensive projects. I said that in my presentation.
It's a really good question. I think we need to be as forthright as we can be about cost. So I'm going to give you my thoughts, and those are my thoughts only. I can't speak for the board because the board hasn't made any decisions yet, and they'll be making those decisions in January. You asked some really good questions about dollars. What's it going to cost you? How much is it going to cost you? Well, if you look at the overall project from the top on down, you're talking a heck of a lot of money. Some of it we're going to be able to manage, and some we just can't. For example, right now we have a fee in place that's going to pay for this plan. Just paying for this plan alone, just the plan, is a challenge. So after we get, but we have a plan, and we're going to hit our numbers, and we may have to extend the pumping fee that we've assigned to $30 already for a little longer than we have, or we may adjust it up or down. Who knows? We'll be making those decisions as we go along. But once we get the plan done, then we've got to talk about implementation, like you said. Implementation, the way I read it, comes in about 3 categories. maybe more. There'll be other bigger categories coming along, but the three big ones are the administrative costs. That means managing the GSP, paying our 2 employees, managing litigation costs, the admin fees, and all those things associated with managing an organization. That's probably going to be one group of dollars. And that's probably, I don't know what that estimate is. We are running numbers to come up with those, and we will have formal estimates at the right time to give you as soon as we have those. The other costs are going to be mitigation costs. How are we going to mitigate wells? What are we going to do and how are we going to manage that? That's a significant amount of money. Wells that go dry after we make decisions, make no mistake about it, we are a regulatory agency. We are going to regulate groundwater in this valley. That's never been done before in the state of California. They regulate surface flows, they regulate a whole bunch of water, but they don't regulate groundwater. We, the GSA in this valley, will be regulating. We're going to regulate the water district. We're going to regulate the county. We're going to regulate any users. We're going to be responsible for that. And it's going to cost money to do that. Then we talk about augmentation fee. It's going to cost a lot of money to bring water into this valley. It's going to cost a lot of money. And you divide those into different categories. Just that category of augmentation, let's talk about the water. We hired the Capital Corps, the people who are our water marketers, who give us reliable estimates of costs. They're putting at the regulation, it could cost us $50 million as a price tag for importing 5,000 acre-feet of water. One-time cost of $50 million to import 5,000 acre-feet a year permanently. $50 million. That's just the water. It's going to cost $5 million to pay Sacramento every year for moving water on their transit systems. And then it's going to cost the infrastructure cost of building the pipeline from Antelope Valley or from bringing water up from down up north. It's going to cost anywhere from $50 million to like $170 million just to build infrastructure. I think this plan can charge forward and successfully meet most of those challenges. But we're going to need help. The Navy is going to have to come across at one point or another and recognize the value that we're doing to the survival of their business. And they're going to have to come across and help us out. The federal government's going to have to come in. We're going to have to beg, borrow, and steal federal government, state government, and any dollars we can to help us offset the cost of that infrastructure. And that's why the augmentation fee that we talked about, that was mentioned here, that's going to be assigned hopefully with the plan as the GSP gets passed. So we talked a little bit about there's going to be a process involved for developing that augmentation fee. That's true. So we've started that process, and that process will be talked about in the GSP, and then that augmentation fee will be assigned, hopefully, when the GSP gets passed. We will know what it is, and we will assign an augmentation fee that will charge people for any water they use outside of that 7650. This is just me talking. Remember that. It's on the board. No decisions have been made. Matter of fact, this all stuff is just out there for your comments and up for change. So there's going to be an augmentation fee. It's going to be a one-time. We have to understand there's going to be a one-time cost for 5,000 acre-feet of water, if that's what we want to do. If we want 10,000 acre-feet of water, depending on how we scale down, how quickly we scale down, that's going to cost $100 million. So we've got some decisions to make real quick, and this is going to cost you money. But if you look at the picture of how much dollars, let's take, for example, we were to say we need to pay, let's say, set an augmentation fee. So anybody pumping water outside that 7650 has to pay an augmentation fee for any water they use. Because this plan essentially is a fee-based plan. Essentially, we are complying with California state law and assigning a fee plan. And so what we're doing is if we say it's going to cost so much dollars, if we say, for example, we want to buy that $50 million purchase, we want to buy 5,000 acre feet permanently per year for the rest of our existence, and it's a one-time cost of $50 million. If you think that's worthwhile, we're going to consider doing it. If, so that, you know, if you do the math, if you look at the math and just say what the cost of the water is, you divide it by the number of hookups to the water district or parcels of land or however else we're going to divide up those dollars, it comes to something that you're going to see, I would guess, anywhere from, you know, I'm afraid to give a number to it, but it's not going to be the numbers you hear that people are talking about $2,000 a year or $1,500 a year. I don't believe those are the numbers even close to those numbers. But the water will cost, your rates will go up, and the sooner we get off the dime and start making those adjustments to our behavior and paying those costs, the better off we're going to be, because it's only going to get worse. We have a significant math problem. We are at fault for that. We've ignored this problem for 30 years, and if we continue to ignore it, it's only getting worse. I can't be more specific with you on the actual cost you're going to pay, but you will know soon, and we're trying to keep those costs as controlled as humanly possible. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Does that help at all? Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I would say to you that if you study the math, you'll recognize that I don't think that's possible. I was in your camp until recently, and I said, I don't see any way out of it. I just don't see it. If you look at 7650, and you look at the numbers of that people use that have state, you know, allocated, they have state rights, that 7650 is gone quickly. And importing water is a reality, I believe, that this community is going to have to accept. Thanks. Thank you, Steve.
Very good. Yeah, and following up what Mick said, I have said it at board meetings and at TAG meetings before too, following up what Mick said is, just looking at the numbers, when you really look at the numbers, I don't think Ridgecrest is Ridgecrest under that option. That's why we haven't pushed it, because it's not a community anymore. It really doesn't work that way. It doesn't work the way, it's not your community you have now, that's for sure. So I wouldn't say that's not an option, absolutely, because Nick Panzer says it is, and I know Nick's a smart guy, that it's an option. But for your community, it's a whole different community under that scenario.
I'm Norman Alexander from the Ridgecrest Area Association of Realtors. We had a few comments. We did have 3 comments that we sent in. I see those are on the website. I'm not sure if they were implemented, if we had a chance. One, again, is the question, I'll just review those real quick and then hit the other one. The growth rate, or just controlling the narrative. It seems like this plan, the scenarios you're looking at, there was a growth rate in there. How that will impact any potential growth on the base. Now, the thing that I heard this evening is interesting is that GA has no control of the base, and the base can grow as much as they want, right? And use as much as water as they want. And we have no impact on that. And so if that happens, but still, controlling the narrative with that, there's a low number, which scenario 6, it was 1%. It's going to be hard for us to get F-35 or Space Defense Agency, which is not part of the base, but our congressman is pushing, along with the president, along with Edwards, those type of things. Those are going to be out of the picture. And believe me, there's competition for that type of stuff. So one of my comments early on, I think I spoke with Ron, I thank you for coming by and talking to us, is having a little stronger narrative in the front introduction, not to sustain the base, but to sustain even future growth in the base and the impact there. The other thing which we heard time and time again, the devil is in the details, and how anyone can make a decision without understanding what the real cost is. The costs are high, these are the numbers, but we aren't exactly sure what they're going to be. Our supervisor just said he doesn't think it's going to be as high as some that we've heard, but we don't know, right? And I do agree, if it says it's 200 million, it's probably 600 million. That's just the way government works. Then the other question is, and this came up, this is a three-year effort, spent $5 million on it, on this plan. And one of the questions that came up, how much of this effort was used to really look at, because the driving assumption is at 7650 and the size of the aquifer. That sets everything in place. It sounds like that what was done was just, again, a large portion of the plan is what was in the top report, right? There was been a lot of money spent. So how much of the effort was to verify those numbers? Again, I was not involved in the TAC or PAC, me personally, so I'm not sure what that was. And we have gotten comments from folks, and you've gotten comments from folks on the 7650, but probably more importantly, the size of the aquifer, because if it's larger than what we think, right, we can draw down, it could be a little bit longer, is that correct? And so things can change a little bit different. Mike, one of the other comments that we have is this concern of the allocation taking place in 2020, right? Without having a clear picture or meeting of the minds on some of these assumptions. And my question is, and the question that came up in some of our meetings is why are we jumping and doing restrictive stuff right out of the gate? I mean, that's just heading straight towards litigation. Once litigation hits, I know you can't make any comments on that, but I think everything stops. That doesn't help anyone. I will say this, is that I know, I don't know if David's still here. Dave and Scott last year went off and talked to our congressman and got some funding for us coming from COSO, like 50%. Well, the NDAA was just passed today, and there was a new part of that the Congressman and Representative Cook added, Section 318, which gave that 50% value, which I think last year, 2019, Dave, was like $5 million bucks, gets allocated to the commander of the base. So it's local control. And I think the idea was some of that money, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was used to figure out some of these numbers. And I think we really need to start looking at it, because, again, litigation costs could go really high, and how that gets figured in. That is it. The really concerned about restricting things right off the bat in 2020 with not really having full fund. Because I know originally it was straight litigation, and the only folks that are going to make all the money are the folks that aren't in the room, that's the lawyers. Yeah, then we have a question about Trona. We got Trona from a real estate point of view and from a Ridgecrest point of view. That's about 500 folks or 500 families that live here, 500 to 700 folks. And how is that being addressed? I know there was we had the water rights thing, and they came out and said they had some rights, and I know that's part of the litigation thing, so I know if you can't make comments.
Maybe just to try a little bit, so that people don't go home empty-handed about some of these questions you raised. Try to look at growth, because I know real estate growth is important to you, and it's important to the community. And several people that have been on the board, it's important to them too. Some of the city representatives, growth is important. The stuff you're seeing in the plan has no intention of restricting or allowing growth. It's not what the plan is for. What we did is make some assumptions there, make some assumptions there for our modeling purpose, so we can look at impacts. So that's all that's in there for. It is just to determine what the impacts were under this scenario. That's all it's for.
Right, but all your numbers are based on that 1% growth. So those numbers triple what the growth is really lost.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with growth, and there's nothing wrong with a triple, but as we described before, we're already in arrears on our water supply. So imported water is your answer. So more imported water, yeah, we can do more both. If the community can support it, we certainly don't have a problem.
So the plan right now is 1% growth right now.
It's not the plan, it's just the impacts that we modeled on our plan.
The
the GSP assumes that growth for impacts.
So those cost numbers, these numbers that we have here, the amount of money we're going to import, things like that, is based on scenario 6.
Correct. Yeah, with those assumptions. Yeah, what are you?
Just to clarify, the 1% you're talking about is not population growth, it's 1% increase in water district production.
Which is 6,350, I think, or 6,530. I think 1% is 65 acre meters, which equates to, I think,
Which equates to about, well, let me put it like this. And I've shared it with some folks, put a chart together. If you look at, I'll just look at the, we've been pushing for the F-35, right? And you look at the number of people that they say plan for the F-35, military and civilian. You do a multiple of 2 or 3 for those folks. And over a 5-year period, that's about 1,500 folks. With the plan as is, and I understand the water, and the 1%, that's 65 acre feet, that's the 1%, that amounts to about 331 people over that 5 years. It doesn't match up. And that's all I'm saying, is that we need to somehow make sure we can control the narrative. That's why a stronger introduction, saying something in future growth on the base. And again, we have a big push also. I mean, the base is our main employer. Anything outside the base is going to get hit with these big fees, because the base can grow as much as they want. So something like again, Space Defense Agency, which we're really trying to, some folks are really trying to push, is something that we would like to do. Representative Cook, Representative McCarthy, the governor and the president all signed off for between China Lake and Edwards for that to come in. And so, again, just want to make sure we control the narrative and we have a plan. If there's a lot of growth, these numbers are based on scenario 6. Anything different from that, if it doubles or triples, what happens to those numbers? This is 3 years, $5 million, and it's mostly the top report. That's been our discussion, and that's a little concerning. So again, this right now does not, it's based on scenario 6. This is 1% growth. And that's what these numbers are based on. Correct? I just want to make sure I was clear on that. If not, these numbers are based on scenario 6, the modeling that you did, which is 1% growth. Anything above that, these numbers have to be adjusted. Okay.
Just a couple more of your things you brought up, I'm trying to pick them up. Your comment on the Navy is true. It's very clear we don't have any control over the Navy, but we don't want to put the Navy in a bad light here. The Navy has been very cooperative. They're in this just as much as everybody else is, because the Navy and that base relies on this community. So bad things happen in the community, bad things happen in the base. So we need each other, and they've helped us a lot. They've put a lot into this effort. And I would expect that, I will have no doubt that they are concerned about water supply, water conservation as much as everybody else. The fact that we're not paying directly into the fees doesn't mean that they have to participate. And you mentioned about the coastal project and the money. Yes, we're working with Scott O'Neill and Dave Janis. We've got an application in now. We're probably looked at another one coming up. Those things are happening, so that you know that. The last thing I wanted to just mention briefly, and I really don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I don't think it really deserves that much time. The issue on storage. We need to be clear, everybody here, when we talk about storage, is the key component of storage is usable storage. Jeff showed you stuff up here on the modeling. He showed you the graphs. He showed you the modeling. He showed you what happens with overpumping the base and what happens to our storage and what happens to the water supply, okay? If there's storage deeper than that, I'll be honest with you, I think it's neat to know. I always like new studies, I always like new information, I'm always willing to work on other studies, but if there's water deeper than that, the decision you have to make is, are you going to live with the impacts that you're going to have, taking the basin down to get to that additional storage, because there will be undesirable impacts, and it will not qualify in the statement with those undesirable impacts. We got water quality, we got impacts, we got mitigated wells we're going to hit, we're going to take a lot of wells out, we're going to have a lot of issues, even if there's water down there. So storage is important, but usable storage is the key, and we are working on the usable storage. And we're very confident we have good information on what that usable storage is. It went into the basics of developing the model. And if there is more water down there, if there's another 10 million acre feet, another 1,000 feet down, if we go down another 1,000 feet and do that, it doesn't really make sense to consider that in your future, because I don't think this community, it doesn't make sense to me to go down there and mine that water and defer some of the actions that need to be done. You need to work with the usable storage we have and address the impacts that we know we're going to have, even with the approach that we have right now. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't look to see whether or not there is more water in other places, or if there's water deeper. It's good information, but I just want to make sure we're not considering that as a possible solution.
You brought some really good points, Norm. There you go. Thank you very much. Some really good points. I want to talk about two of them. The Todd report. The Todd report was commissioned by, I think the county commissioned that. I think we started that thing. And Todd Engineers is now the water master for the Central Valley in Kern County. That was no new study done in the Todd report. That was a compilation, historical perspective of a collection of studies that have been done, and they formed conclusions based on the preponderance of evidence that all those 50 years of studies suggested. So we came up with a number, the TAC came up with a number, 7650, and again, you were correct when you said that's a pivotal number. It is probably the pivotal number of this whole basin. And one of the things that I've insisted, and I've talked with Stetson Engineers, is we have to instill a constant challenge to every number that we put in that report. We constantly have to challenge every assumption. We have to institutionalize that challenge. So as we go forward, we're re-examining and re-examining and re-examining again every assumption we make, because you're right again when you said those are estimates. Those are the best estimates that our teams of hydrogeologists could give us. So I appreciate your thought. And the second thing, messaging. Another really good message. Another good thought. The message to the Navy is clear. I've talked to them several times, and they have been crystal clear. They say that they know we have a challenge out here. What they want is a plan. As a matter of fact, this is the way they look at me, and they say, put the plan right here. They want a plan. They want a demonstration from this community that we understand the issue and we're committed to resolving it. Once we have that plan, I think a large part of the messaging problem that we're talking about is going to be, is moving in the right direction. We still have to work on the edges, but...
Thank you for that. The key thing there with the plan, putting the plan in hand, the plan right now, you know there are other folks out there that's competitive with China Lake and other entities, other naval, Air Force entities around, okay? I just want to make sure we, in the introduction, is strongly stated that, because I don't want someone that's going to take that plan in the Pentagon that's not our friend, and they're going to drill down and say, here's what this plan says. And it's going to say, not that much road.
Well, here's my comment.
And that's the only thing I'm concerned about, because I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what the message we want to say, and that's my only point there.
Got it. I agree with you. I don't want to take too much time.
Yeah.
But the plan will say, if this plan is adopted, that we are reducing our overdraft from 27,000 acre feet to 12,000 acre feet. That is an extremely strong statement that we're making, that we understand the severity of our problem, and we are creating a future for this community. Because even reducing it to 12,000 feet, that gives us time from where it was 60, 70 years, and it moves that timeline out to 100, 150 years.
Right.
So that act alone, just adopting an aggressive plan that's going to work to get our consumption under control, is going to be a strong message to the neighbor.
Okay, since I have the mic, I just have one quick question for you.
For me?
For you.
Oh, me, oh, me.
Okay, so this community has done a lot of, from a technical point of view,
one of the challenges, I'm not speaking as part of the association now. We aren't looking at any other solutions. We've got a variable. We've got two variables. We've got usage, right? And we have recharge. And we're trying to balance those two out. We are not looking at any other solution. Desalinization, surface water where we can do surface water. And I can tell you, 50 years from now, 70 years from now, there's going to be a technology to solve this problem. Think 50, 70 years ago, right? We weren't thinking about going to space. We weren't thinking about any of that stuff. So that's the only other thing. That's the only other concern. If you can talk to folks at the state level and say, hey, there's got to be, we also have to look at other solutions. It's just not the balancing these two numbers. Because we are breaking our backs trying to get down to the 7650, right? And there may be a technical solution. Get these folks thinking outside the box, right? I mean, that's what, we've got all these PhDs, we've got all these technical folks. Let's start looking at those type of things. Right now, we're just trying to cut costs. We aren't trying to be innovative at all. And that's my own personal thought.
Thanks.
I'm not going to jump into that.
Oh, Dave, Janice might have some thoughts about that.
So I just wanted to go back to the cost in regards to so because these are valid and good questions. So when we look at at growth, and so if we grow by 1%, those numbers that say we go to 3% or whatever that increase would be. Oh, right up to my okay. I'm sorry. My hearing's kind of bad. So anyway, so back to the growth factor. So if we grow at the 1%, those numbers reflect it. But if we say increase it in spurts, which is known to happen with the base. But say we go to 3%, those numbers aren't going to triple because we're looking at initial costs for infrastructure, and those are one-time costs. So the cost would be increase in water, which is going to be expensive, but to buy the water and to increase that water supply for that extra 3%. So we're looking at the cost of actual water itself at that point. So the numbers won't triple from this. Those infrastructure costs when you go with AVAC or if you go with DWP and you bring water down from the north. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear because it is important that we have the availability of water. And for growth, that supplement of water is going to be imperative. And so I just want to make that clear that we're looking at the cost will increase for the more water you need to buy or purchase or bring down, but those numbers won't triple. So that's all I want to bring up. These questions are very, very good questions.
Okay, we done with that feedback? Okay. My name is Mike Neal, and I've got some prepared comment, but I want to touch on a few things that have been said before, just as lead in here. Number one is what you're looking at, which nobody can see, but I think maybe they've got it on paper, has been brought up here before. What most people really care about, and the only thing they really care about a lot is what is this going to cost me? How much am I going to pay for the rest of my life here in the valley to make this happen? Okay. The other thing may be, well, how much do I have to conserve? Do I have to get rid of my yard? Blah blah blah. But that's an ancillary, secondary thing that is not as painful. As far as those programs that talk about, well, what do we do? Mr. Litz said, well, we'll do what you want. Well, I don't agree with that at all because I've seen the board for 3 years now. They appointed themselves to this position. They were not elected to this position. They made all these decisions. They brought us to this point. They spent $5 million getting this plan here. And they're going to make it happen, I guarantee you. And it's been stated, I believe, by yourself, Mr. Stetson, that we've got to do all of this. So this is my comment that I'm going to give a copy to the 3 board members here tonight. I'd like the other 2 to get a copy. I'm submitting this for the record, and I'd like a written response to the questions that I have in the end. The Groundwater Agency exists to meet the requirements of state SGMA law and should be funded by the state according to the state constitution, Article 13B, Section 6, and that's the highest law in the land. It trumps any other state code in existence. Okay, it seems, the GA seems to miss this fact, however, about this section in the state constitution, and all we've heard tonight is, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? Okay? Like I said before, so far we're up to $5 million in debt. All these are, 150, 200, 300 million. If you take these numbers, you amortize out the capital costs over 30 years, you add in the total annual costs, you look at what might be the lowest, what might be the highest, it comes out anywhere from $1,300 to $2,200 per year per household extra cost. And that is nothing to sneeze at. Now the lawyers stated in one of I think the last GA meeting that they wanted to get this agency started, charted towards doing these projects next year. They talked about looking into all legalities and starting Prop 218 hearings and so forth. This is how you do the whole thing. And they want to get started making us pay for that by the summer. They said that, okay? Yet we only have this meeting. We're going to have 2 more morning meetings for the public to supposedly be able to attend to comment on this. As far as I'm concerned, that has never been right. It's not right at all. Unfortunately, we have evening meetings. They don't see a lot of people. But if you make them available, perhaps more people would come. So to summarize all that, the GA is acting like they expect us to pay for this hundreds of millions of dollars of mountain of debt. Why haven't the lawyers that they've got working for them educated them about how the state constitution addresses this? I don't know. But I'll read it for you. It's very simple. Article 13B, Section 6 of the state constitution, whenever the legislature or any state agency mandates a new program or a higher level of service on any local government, the state shall provide a subvention of funds to reimburse that local government for the cost of the program or the increased level of service. There's more to it. That's the heart of the section right there. Okay? So why has not the GA addressed this with the State Department of Water Resources instead of telling us they're going to make us pay for it? Here's what I think they should say, and I'm going to suggest in a nutshell, they say to the state when they present this plan. The state has mandated a GSP to achieve groundwater sustainability in the Indian Wells Valley Basin. The IWV GSA plan meets Sigma law. Being a mandated action by the California state government, costs are lawfully the state's obligation according to Article 13B of the state constitution, Section 6. We present the cost of generating this GSP for reimbursement. Subsequent actions by the IWV GA may entail when funding is provided. This request shall in no way be interpreted as a request for state intervention in the GSP. The writing authority for providing water to the citizens of the Indian Wells Valley remain the right of the citizens of the Indian Wells Valley. The state's role in the IWV GSP now is to fund it. They should tell them that. And then say, give us money, we'll get busy. It's your responsibility. Okay? Without doing this, if they don't do this, like I said, $1,300 to $2,200 per year per household extra expense. The well-being, the economic well-being of every citizen in this valley can be in jeopardy from this. Who can afford that much extra expense per year? Well, maybe a few, but not many. The effect is going to be widespread across the valley, and it's going to result in an economic earthquake that exceeds the effect of the last 2 physical earthquakes we had here last summer. The GA needs to take the constitutionally lawful stance outlined in what I just said before and make our state government behave lawfully and fund the GSP and any further GA actions and not force an economic tsunami on the people of this valley. Bear with me, there's 4 questions here. The GA County, the city, and the water district need to get educated on the California Constitution to avoid bankrupting this valley needlessly. The questions I submit for answer, and I'm asking for written answers to be on the record to these questions. Is this board going to have its lawyers elaborate before the public how Article 13B, Section 6 of the California Constitution applies to the funding of this state-mandated GSP? Number 2, once clarity of the state's lawful obligation to fund its mandated programs is delineated, is this board going to formulate an approach to press the state for full funding of the Indian Wells Valley GSP? Number 3, when a request for funding is made to the state, is this board going to suspend pursuing a Prop 218 action to force payment for these GSP programs upon the citizens of the Indian Wells Valley? And the last one, is this board is not going to press the state to fund its mandated Indian Wells Valley GSP program, are the individual members of this board each going to explain in public why they will not act according to their sworn duty to uphold the California Constitution? Any questions? I'll be glad to take them. I've got copies of this for all the board members.
Thank you. Did I hear you right earlier? You said that importation of water could come from Central Valley, possibly? Did I hear that? I'm sorry. Did you say possibly that our imported water might come from Central Valley in the future? Did I hear that, or did I?
The answer to that is, in order to get water to this valley, we have to find it from a source.
Yeah.
So the Central Valley and the State Water Project, the Central Valley is where the water source is.
Right.
You might acquire the water at that location, but we wouldn't bring it from the Central Valley. We would actually get the rights to it and probably pick it up off the State Water Project and then bring it through the existing facilities. So there's 2 components. One is physical facilities to get it here,
Right.
and the other is to get the rights to have the water to put it in those facilities.
Okay, because I just wanted to, this is just bringing something up, but just food for thought. You know, there's 35,000 homes have been approved by Kern County and also Los Angeles County on the northeast part of the counties, where Highway 5 is, and you turn off. I don't know if you're familiar with the area, but I'm very familiar with it. 138 Quail Lake. So you're going to have this humongous development. And my question, because you know we are Kern County, or you know maybe we're going to work for the LA County. Where's all that water coming from to supply these $35,000 homes? I wish 35,000 homes. Is it coming from Central Valley? And I'm thinking if it brings down like that, is there some way we in the future could cooperate with that entity and get water out here? Maybe importation that way, maybe, or will there be, you know, in the process, like we're going through Inyo County now, saying no, you can't have the water, but you know, and I know things might change. Would it be that they have so much power with those 35,000 homes that they're going to say, hey, Ridgecrest, you're on your own? And I would like that to be maybe just considered in the broad picture of the counties and our water resources. That was my comment and question. Thank you very much.
You bet. Just as a general answer, I think big picture, I'm not sure where that water's going. We actually worked on that project years ago, the Quail Lake project, and yeah, there's a lot of water. They have been buying up water rights up in that area to try to do the same thing we are trying to do. That's get access to the rights to the supply and then figure out how they're going to get it to their homes. So they're working ahead of the game just like we are. And the bigger picture of that is, that's kind of why we're talking about imported water right now and what to do and try to get out in front of it, because as far as I said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I can tell you water costs are not going down. Imported water costs aren't going down, and with Sigma, imported water costs are going to get more scarce, and when they're more scarce, they're going to get more expensive. So being out in front of it is probably the best thing to do to keep costs as low as we can, is try to get out in front of the other areas that need the same supply to it. So we're going to be competing, yes.
My name is Nick Panzer. I'm a member of the Policy Advisory Committee. My name has been brought up a couple of times this evening in connection with the question of, do we need to import or don't we need to import? And I'd like to give you my take on that. In one sense, yes, I'll explain this, you'll have to import. And yet in another sense, maybe we don't have to import. I like this latter sense. I'll walk you through that one first. In the 2010 census, there were 35,000 people in this basin, plus the Searles Valley Basin. Their health and safety would require, by today's standards, in this hot community, about 100 gallons of water per day per person, times 35,000, works out to 4,100 acre feet per year, would take care of the health and safety needs of all 35,000 people. Health and safety is basically your indoor needs, the standard drinking, cooking, cooling, certain outdoor and indoor needs, sanitation, leakage, fire suppression, line flush, all that I throw into that 100 gallons per day per person. That doesn't leave a lot between 4,100 and 7,650, but it leaves something. Not enough for everybody, and that leads to the other sense. If you're determined to have your lawn and your pool and your sycamore trees and your non-native vegetation, then yes, you will have to import water. I don't have those things. I've only been in this valley 15 years. I own 2 homes, and both of them I took out all of the grass, I took out all of the trees essentially, and I went xeriscape, and I'm actually closer to dryscape. And about a third of the people in my neighborhood have done the same thing, and I think their yards are beautiful. But that's me. I understand and respect those that want their big trees, want their lawns, or swimming pools. And yeah, we will have to import if you want to continue the lifestyle as we know it, if you take the broader community. But there is a way. And it's not going to work for everybody. And so that's the real decision I think each one of us has to ask ourselves. Can I live here with native vegetation? Or do I have to have the other amenities that we have traditionally had? So that's kind of the way I think about it, you know. What camp are you in? I have no doubt that under living within our means, not importing, that some people will definitely leave this valley. They will not want to stay here without their grass and without their trees. They're going to leave. Okay. A lot of them are going to stay. And I would venture to say that a lot of people that now would say, you know, I really like my lawn and trees, when they see the consequences of these numbers to them personally, they might think a second time about xeriscaping, for example, like about a third of my neighbors have done so far. So, those are the 2 senses. Do we have to import or not? And I think it's a question we all need to sort of ask ourselves and take back to our representative and deal with that in the coming months. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, he just said he's getting his steps in. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Derek Hoffman, attorney from Meadowbrook Dairy. There is one attorney in the room tonight. I just have 3 quick questions for you, Jeff and Steve, if you would. My first question is, what are the significant changes in this version of the GSP as compared to the November draft? And if you could just summarize, kind of in a nutshell, even what you think are the major changes here Because I don't see a red line or anything that calls those out, so that's my first question. My second question is, are all of the written comments that were provided on the November draft posted to the website? And my third question is, will all the written comments on this draft be posted to the website? Easier questions than the ones I've asked in the past, but those are my questions for tonight. Like you said, there's only one attorney in the room, so I'll keep my questions to these tonight.
Derek, I don't know if off the top of my head I can tell you the major changes. I mean, there's no new programs. We've tried to make things clearer, but I think one of the reasons you're asking is you mentioned there's no red line. We do intend to post the red line changes from the TAC version to this version, so all of you can go back and look and see specifically what changes we made. Hopefully that's my way of answering your question. What changed? You'll be able to see it. I didn't verify them, but the intent was to post all the comments that we got. Yeah, as far as I know, they were.
I don't stand on it.
And certainly all the comments on this draft will be posted.
Anybody else?
You don't get a second shot. Yeah, you do. We asked if we could limit comments to 3 minutes, and we were told no.
Well,
So, or a second shot, so you didn't.
we certainly have had people that have talked far more than 3 minutes. And my comment is, people in this audience, and the people listening, and the people who read the newspaper, need to remember that this basin has been in overdraft for 60 years. 6-0. We have a limited supply by definition in our groundwater storage. We have been pumping it, overusing it for 60 years. Nature is unforgiving. Just remember that.
Anybody else?
We heard some mention about the Todd report, and I think it was recognized as the greatest preponderance of evidence available. So that's why we went with that. And so since that time, everything that we've done appears has been based on the assumptions of the Todd report. Assumptions are not fact. And maybe you mentioned earlier about challenging the assumptions of the Todd report. I haven't seen that done. I think that's a great idea, but we're way down the road here. And it's not a proven fact they were a closed basin. It's not a proven fact they were an overdraft. In fact, we were reclassified when this whole thing started to be a critical overdraft, and that was changed because of the Todd report. And I can remind you again that Dr. Christoph, president of the Todd Engineers report, Todd Engineers, said that she was surprised at how much weight was put on this report. She was just report, more studies need to be done. It's too late now, we're way down the road here, but the plan due. But it's not a proven fact. We have never established as a fact that we are, there are lots of studies. It's not the greatest preponderance of evidence we have. We have lots of peer-reviewed studies that have not been considered. Some of us have lived here a long time. There are people who are experts on water that haven't been able to voice their opinion, haven't been heard. And we still need to find out We still need to find out how much water we have. We might have a lot more water. There are people who have lived in this valley for a long time, who have pumped wells, who have read reports, who have worked with Dr. Carl Austin and other experts, and that have studies that speak strongly of evidence of water, then that has not been looked into. We need to prove our source. We need to deal with facts. This has not been data-driven, and that's too bad.
Les Kazakhstan, I'd like to kind of address the comments we just heard as I understand them. And of course, the best of all worlds is we could take the 7650 and we could skip 70 years in the future, or 50 years in the future. We could use the model and we could say, oh my God, we had it all wrong. We didn't predict it right. The numbers were wrong, they weren't getting good. But we can go back 50 years. We can use the model. We can use everything we know for the last 50 years on how much pumping has happened, and we can try to predict where we're at today. And that's been done. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'll ask members of the chat to speak up if I've got this wrong. But we have, the model's good, and the prediction is pretty darn good. If we can go back 50 years, take the data that we know, and predict where we are today. That's where I find my comfort level, that we have a good starting point. It is based on fact and modeling as much as it can be done at this time.
Michael, Amy, and I have a question for Steve. About 30 minutes into tonight's presentation, you made a remark that your studies showed that our recharge is 7650. I follow the water pretty closely. I haven't seen any studies. I was wondering if you could tell me where I could locate those, your studies.
Very similar to what Wes said. What we did is evaluated the history and evaluated the amount of water that came into the basin, the hydrology of the basin that came in and the pumping that came out and change of water levels. So the study was done, the evaluation was done over historic periods and using the model to evaluate what basically the component of recharge is, and that's what we ended up with. Now, in doing that, we also looked at all the other studies that have been done. There's been many other studies done that have ranged from anywhere to 4,000 to 5,000 to 12,000 or 15,000 acre feet, and we found out that we were pretty much right in that same ballpark. But the evaluation that was done is very similar to the modeling that Wes just described to see how the basin functions and come up with those components.
Are those evaluations available?
I'm sure we can give you the information you need to look at that. It's part of the development of the model and running our baseline model and our calibration model and running that model. Those are the components that went in to make sure the calibration of the model matched real conditions. So we use those numbers to calibrate the model and make it accurate, and those are the numbers that went in. So we can certainly show you the calibration process that we use.
Thank you, Steve. That helped a lot.
David St. Amand, I'm speaking as a private citizen. These are my comments and mine alone and don't reflect anybody else. As far as I know, there's only one person that's claimed the valley is an open basin, and that is Dr. Carl Austin. On the website for the GA, you'll find what has been described as a peer-reviewed paper by Carl Austin that's described the basin in detail. The fact of the matter is that it's not a peer-reviewed paper. It should not be listed as such. It is an interdepartmental memo from Dr. Austin to somebody over in the environmental division at the Naval Air Warfare Station. He does not make a new statement about the water quality or quantity or any of that stuff going on. in the valley, he does the picks at the various reports that have been done before. Every other report written has indicated this is a closed basin. They might disagree on how much water they think is being flowing in from recharge, but the only person that thinks it was open is Carl, and Carl was mistaken.
No, I was actually addressing something you said earlier. Right. The only thing I was saying is, to make correct you, is that yes, people do disagree as to what the inflow is. But the state is giving us the numbers, so we're going to have to deal with that.
My friends, I'm Skip Gorman. To bring this down to a household level, this is where I'm thinking as I'm listening to all this. I'm sure that it exists. Feedback. I was thinking feedback. I don't remember it being said. Surely it exists in your plan. The community, and we're a spunky bunch of desert rats out here. We're going to accept all this as a challenge, and most of us will soldier forward and try to make it all work. But while we're using paper plates and maybe set up a homemade jury-rigged outhouse in the backyard and do whatever it is we need to do to save water, it would be very important if we get quick, accurate feedback. How are we doing? We ask that every day. How are we doing? There should be a mechanism within the details of your plan. Oh, I remember the old Red Cross days when we brought dimes into work and a large red thermometer kept climbing up, and we could see on a daily basis how we were doing. And it was a challenge and a reward as we saw we were doing well. And if indeed Steve over there found a Major League Baseball laying on the table in front of him and I held up a catcher's mitt, it had perspicacity to toss me that ball. And I'd make a sequence of adjustments in the air with my mitt so as to catch the darn ball. Those adjustments are the feedback. And the time between each feedback has to be as little as possible from a system engineering viewpoint. And it has to be accurate. I wouldn't want to be chasing some theoretical number. I don't know if the physics of this situation will allow that, but I'm sitting back here hoping maybe it'll happen. Feedback is very important. It'll take the dynamics of an individual who's got a scrappy voice like you, Steve, and we'll get it quickly, and it'll provide us with fear or assurance, depending on which way we're going. That was my comment. Thanks.
Anyone else? Last chance. Is this on? Okay, last chance.
This is, for those people that are not submitting comments or have not submitted comments already and want to, how do they get them to the Stetson? Because if you're not on a policy advisory committee or a technical advisory committee, what's the method to get the written comments to you before January 6th?
That's a really simple question and a really good one that I didn't really think about. I would say for this group right now, maybe we would get that message out there. I would send them straight to us if you can, email or however you want to send them. And I would send them to the current water quality, the authority's general manager of the water district, because we coordinate all the stuff we do with the water district too, and making sure that they post the stuff and we'll make sure we get it. So I would say between Stetson and the water district, we will get them. But we should get that message out. That's a very good question. Thanks.
Mallory Boyd, got a number of hats. I'm not sure which one I'm wearing right now, so let's just be Mallory at the moment. A couple of things that occurred to me. One was, I totally agree with Skip, but our ability to make those measurements and then compare is challenged right now. We need more monitoring wells. We need more to do this, but I think that is part of the intent of the GSP. And as Mick mentioned, we need to challenge these numbers as frequently and as often as we can to make sure we're doing the right thing. So that's there. One thing that we're not doing as a population to help, at least I haven't seen the numbers recently, is well registration. We don't know how much we're pulling out of the ground. We've made some estimates. We have a pretty good feel for how many wells we have. We don't have a real good feel for how much the water each of those are pulling out of the ground. The problem could be worse than we're estimating, or it could be better, don't know. But we really need to help the public understand why it's important that they take steps to help us understand that dynamic of the valley. Personally, my well is now registered. And I went through quite a bit of discussion with my siblings who we share a mutual well to come to that decision that we owe the valley, we owe the citizens of the valley a better feel for how much we were contributing to the draft, or the draft. And I would hope that many of us who know others that have wells would look at this as a positive step to our future. I actually think that Sigma is a good thing. Don't throw me out of here with spears, but it's forcing us to look at a problem that we've had for a long time and try to figure out how bad the problem is and take steps to fix it. And we all owe it to each other to do what we can do to make that possible. Thanks.
Don Decker again. Mallory is bringing up, the issue of our uncertainty in particular in domestic well production, the de minimis production, but it's a small fraction of the total that's being pumped, and the major wells are all metered and have been for a long time, and those well records are all part of the deliberation. The Todd report was a compilation of existing reports and its findings, with the exception of some field work that Gus Yates did do. He was here for a couple of weeks solid, and he basically visited every piece of property in the valley and made an eyeball estimate of water consumption based upon the landscaping. And the numbers that came out of it were based upon other studies that had been done similarly where those properties had been metered. So that wasn't just a wild guess. And so the numbers that are in the Todd report for the rural domestic pumping is absolutely in the ballpark. And if we add another decimal place to it, it really won't make much difference. We certainly all need to contribute. I'm not disputing that at all. But I think also we need to concentrate on those areas where improving our understanding actually gets us something that's useful other than another decimal place.
A lot of comments, really good comments were made, and I got a question for you. Is it an irrefutable fact that our water table is in decline? Yes.
Like how much per year? Yeah.
requests per year.
Right.
Long-term average, it ranges between 1 to 2 up to 3 feet a year, but generally 1 to 2 feet a year long-term.
My 3 wells are still sitting exactly where they were 9 months ago.
Yeah, this is pretty much generally based on life. The whole down.
And where is that report?
It's in the GSP. There's information in there that shows the history of the groundwater levels with the wells, and we show that the history along with the projections going forward. It's in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, I remember a report that was given by both you and the Kern Water Agency by Michelle that stated that the average over the basin decline is 6 inches. Is that true?
No, the number that I recall is between 1 foot and 1.5 foot average over the basin, not 6 inches.
I remember I was so surprised because I remember in a meeting, Mick asked you to come up twice, and you, we'll have to go back and find that because I do remember that you and Michelle Anderson both gave that as an average over the basin was 6 inches. So we need to go find that.
I do recall Michelle making that statement. I don't recall that I did, but maybe I did. The number I've always put out is 1 foot to 1.5 foot, but I do recall Michelle in the meeting mentioning 6 inches, and she was questioned on that.
How many well and tell units do you have?
Thanks, Tom. Lee here with Well and Tell. There's 10 well monitoring systems under the water authorities. The water district has a few more now. So there's 10 total.
Yeah, total.
And if there are a lot more, you can start to determine a better recharge value or cost effect, things like that.
Last thoughts? Oh, here we go.
Is there a chance that we can get more information on the reclamation, the water reclamation possibilities, how much we can reclaim, and the methodologies, costs of reclaiming the water? That should be put in here as well.
The recycled water?
Recycled water.
Yeah, the technical memo we have as an appendix is all the information that we have on sort of the expansion and use of it at this time, and then the city has a report on their plans for redoing their plan, expanding their capacity.
Okay.
Anybody else? Last chance. Okay.
Thank you all. Very good comments. Thank you, everybody.
Just wanted to mention the Groundwater Authority, the next meeting is next Thursday, the 19th at 10 o'clock. So hope to see you there, and thank you for attending.